Toitu te mara tane, toitu te mara tangaroa, toitu te tangata. If the land is well and the sea is well, the people will thrive. Tēnei ka mihi ke te mana wheno o Aotearoa. We acknowledge the local tribal authorities of New Zealand and all other traditional custodians of the lands that you may be joining us from. Tēnā koutou katoa. Hello, everybody. A very warm welcome to you all. My name is Ben Adelberg, and I am based in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, New Zealand. I'm the co-founder of the Lentil Intervention, an Australasian advocacy platform disseminating all aspects of planetary health. Our aim is to inspire the adoption of lifestyle changes toward climate-friendly and healthy lifestyle practices and foster resilient communities. It is a New Zealand registered charity and forms the umbrella entity for the following three programs. Available on all popular podcasting platforms, the Lentil Intervention podcast hosts conversations with leading scientists, researchers, academics, health experts, PhD students, and other industry leaders, guests local to Australia and New Zealand, with the occasional exception, focusing on issues and bringing awareness to our most pressing and relevant challenges on our corner of the globe. The first of the community initiatives that fall under the Lentil Intervention is Sports Gear Revived. Established 12 years ago to run alongside my endurance sports coaching business, Kaitiaki Endurance Sports, Sports Gear Revived collects and redistributes unwanted sports clothing, shoes, and equipment to schools and groups within low socioeconomic and high deprivation communities of the Waikato and Northland regions of New Zealand. In doing so, we're enabling more to participate in sports, thereby enjoying the associated health and social benefits, immersing in nature, and creating better environmental awareness. And the other community initiative is Athletes for Nature, a movement of not just athletes, but outdoor enthusiasts that realize the importance of changing their behavior in a way that will positively impact nature. Katiakitanga is the Māori process and practice of conserving the environment, and as athletes, we are well primed to care about nature as this is our playground. There are 12 action steps that members can undertake. These have been created and will continue to evolve over time by our community. The goal for Athletes for Nature is to grow this community so we can inspire more outdoor enthusiasts, coaches, event organizers, and sponsors to incorporate more ethical and climate-friendly policies and behaviors. Membership to Athletes for Nature is irrespective of the sport code and the individual's affiliation to a particular club, group, or entity. No barriers, one community, irrespective of their background. And a big thank you to the sponsor of this webinar series, Pathfinder. Pathfinder is an ethical KiwiSaver that selects companies generating positive benefits and returns. To ensure that we provide no barriers to access to valuable sessions like these, they have supported this series. It is an absolute privilege to introduce someone that not only inspires me, but gives me hope and vindication of the work that I try to do with Athletes for Nature, Damian Hall. Damian is a record-breaking ultra-marathon runner and athletics coach who has represented Great Britain and continues to achieve competitive results in some of the world's toughest and grueling races. Damian has accumulated a tremendous collection of palmares, winning 11 ultras, including the 268-mile The Spine race with a course record, Ultra Tour Monte Rosa, and 145-mile Ice Ultra. Top 10 placings at several Ultra Trail World Tour races, including 5th at UTMB, breaking 8 running records, FKTs, and 2 DNFs at Barkley Marathons, which we'll touch on shortly. Damian is an experienced journalist, author of several books, including the award-nominated We Can't Run Away From This. He is also a very passionate climate activist, tea lover, and a member of several environmental organizations and initiatives, and co-founder of the Green Runners. Damian Hall.
Right, Damian. So a warm welcome. Thank you so much. We were just chatting offline. You've had a lot of sort of speaking engagements, but we really appreciate your time to come on to the seminar series. So thank you so much.
Yikes. Thank you, Ben. That was, thanks for your introduction. And that was, but thank you for all the work you're doing. You're doing much more than I am. I feel like an imposter. So thank you. And thank you for putting these webinars on.
So for I fair to say, I think most of our attendees will know who you are, but there's more depth as to with your background. It's a fascinating story. Again, go back to our podcast that we had late last year. But just for the benefit of all those dialed in and our listeners, very brief introduction. How you got into running and trail running, ultra marathons. You were a late starter to the world of trail ultra running. So tell us how it all began and how the seeds were somehow planted in this part of the world, Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah, I didn't do my first kind of adult running event till I can't even remember now, 2011, I think, when I was about 35, 36. But before that, yeah, I'd spent the best part of a decade in Australia and New Zealand. And certainly in New Zealand, I really got into the sort of whole tramping culture and did several of your great walks. And before that, yeah, I played soccer a lot, but I liked pubs and so on. I wasn't a serious outdoorsy person, but being in New Zealand and Australia, did change that for me. Just the stunning landscapes, getting out in the mountains, especially, yeah, South Island, still very happy memories there. But also in Australia, I visited Tasmania, and that was that was quite unsettling, I suppose, with the green issues down there, especially with the logging and so on. So that was maybe a sort of an early sign of feeling politicized by the landscapes and some of the themes. And then, yeah, back in Britain, did my first half marathon almost on a whim in 2011, and just absolutely loved it. But then started to learn people ran on trails and people ran much further, and that really captured my imagination. And I really got really got carried away into all of that, as I imagine a lot of people here have as well.
Yeah. And then the other important question: what sparked your environmental activism?
Yeah, I guess yeah, I had those sort of feelings from Tasmania of like, there's a bit of an environmental struggle going on in parts of the world. But then it wasn't, if I'm totally honest, it wasn't really till about sort of 2019 that I felt sort of another layer of politicization, if that's a word. When in Britain, there's a group called Extinction Rebellion. I imagine they've got groups down there as well, who started doing these big protests in London. They brought London to a standstill, which takes some doing, with these incredible protests. They had a massive pink boat and they parked it in the middle of a massive roundabout and just got on the main news, and they were kind of saying, look, guys, this is really urgent, and people aren't treating it as urgently as they should. The media aren't telling the whole story. The government aren't reacting quickly enough. And yeah, that really woke me up, pun intended. And I realize now a lot of people were woken up by that. And then you don't have to dig far to go, oh, hold on, the scientists are screaming at us. And we, probably most people watching here are aware that, the current temperatures in the Atlantic are just off the charts. And we've just had our first year above the sort of 2.5 degree threshold that the Paris Agreement was meant to protect us from. We've just had that last year. And without going into all the sort of, I suppose, wildfires, flooding, etc., that's happening around the world. It's happening. Climate breakdown is happening, and clearly governments and so on aren't reacting quickly enough. So there's a lot of us now, I think, have realised and are sort of alarmed and activated by it.
Yeah. So we're going to sort of make reference to, you've published a number of books. The most recent one, We Can't Run Away From This, a fantastic read that I really encourage all of our listeners, if you haven't yet, get yourself a copy, published late 2022. We'll touch on various aspects, but what inspired you to write this particular book?
I guess it was a chain that happened, I suppose, from in late 2019. I sort of joined my first protest with Extinction Rebellion in London in the autumn. It was kind of easy for me in a way because my sister was already sort of involved with them, so I knew I could just sort of turn up without really, it wasn't that intimidating. In fact, it was a wonderful experience actually, really welcoming and yeah, further galvanizing. But then I guess naturally I started thinking about my own footprint as an athlete, and you're kind of like, oh, hold on, I'm flying to races on average like 3 times a year. I guess I'm on Instagram saying, hey everyone, look at this new kit I've got. And I started, I suppose, analyzing, yeah, my own lifestyle, and how much of that fitted, I suppose, with this thing I was really concerned about, our climate and ecological emergency. And you start analyzing your own footprint, and yeah, some of those some of that journey and those thoughts have happened, I guess, publicly, or online, of sort of just discussing things, and some of it's happened consulting with other runners, and consulting with other organizations. And then I'd done one book for this publisher, Vertebrate Publishing, and it was actually them that really encouraged me to go, well, hold on, this feels very topical. How about how about putting this into a book? How bad is running, basically? How bad is sport? What can we do? Those sorts of issues. So they really encouraged me to sort of look into it further. And what I discovered was not very cheery. Yeah, it was very gloomy, especially the sportswear side of things. I imagine we'll get more into that if you like, but yeah, it was quite. I don't want to use the word depressing sort of too flippantly, but it was, it really got really gloomy reading. And yeah, put it all into a book, I suppose, and it came out, and yeah, around that time I was chatting to a lot of other runners, and we formed the Green Runners as well up in the UK, but it's a global thing.
Yeah. Now, if any of our listeners, if their primary sport is not running, drop in the chat what sport it is, and we might kind of weave that into our discussion. But you mentioned running is not all that rosy when it comes to our environmental impact. So let's get a little bit into that, the ecological impact. In other words, CO2 equivalents. I mean, that's kind of the general measure we look at. Generally, people say all you need is a pair of shoes and you're done. But really, running's a bit more than just a pair of shoes. So what is our footprint? We like to think that we're just getting into nature. We're not really causing anything, but there's a whole lot of layers that contribute to that. So in terms of your research, what really came out as some key areas that we need to be aware of?
Well, I guess the things that jumped out at me, the things that surprised me, if we start with sportswear, yeah, the trainer industry globally creates as many emissions as the United Kingdom. That's not just running shoes. That's all of trainers, sneakers, DAPs, running shoe, athleisure shoes as well. But yeah, around the same 1% of global emissions, roughly the same as the UK, and that was a stunning revelation. And of course, we just cycle through shoes quickly, don't we? And the brands are telling us, oh, you need to throw your shoes out after 300 miles, which is just a massive myth. So that led to this overconsumption crisis, where of course the shoe manufacturers are creating more and more. Now even people like Adidas are creating, a single-use shoe that you're only meant to wear for one race. But yeah, none of this stuff is recyclable. It's all made ultimately from oil, plastic and oil, and it doesn't biodegrade, and then there are emissions in creating it. So that was pretty unsettling, and I was kind of like, oh yikes, yeah, I'm part of that problem. I think I can't remember how many pairs I had when I counted in the book, but it might have been over 20. So that was unsettling. And then our kit as well has so many issues. Now, at least our kit tends to last much longer, but I mean, every time we wash it, we're releasing, microfibers into the environment. And yeah, certainly in Britain, there's a problem with sort of free race T-shirts. They're just dished out, and their creation, usually involved sort of, water pollution, toxic dyes. The cotton industry still has, child labor and slave labor. So yeah, all sorts of problems. And then yeah, if we're giving away free things all the time, ultimately often that just ends up as being chucked out because we don't value it, and we don't. So yeah, sportswear kit is a problem. And then the next big one usually is going to be our travel. And I discovered that sort of the Paris Marathon each time it happens, it releases the equivalent emissions of giving birth to kind of 35 people and their entire lifetime's emissions, which again was quite horrifying. And it made me almost think, well, should these events even be happening? Almost, which I mean, there are good reasons. These big events inspire lots of people and create lots of fundraising and so on. And I've taken part in some. So I think they're still worth having. I imagine most people would agree, but can probably be done better. So those were the two things that really jumped out. It was how bad our sportswear is, and one more fact on the sportswear is apparently around the world, every second a truck of clothing is thrown into landfill or incinerated every second, because that's how much this sort of global fashion overconsumption crisis is creating all this waste. So those are the two big areas. The third one would be, if you're analysing individual footprints outside of running, it's going to be diets. That's a trickier one to calculate for a runner, because obviously, in the average day, how much of those calories went to our running. But hopefully, I think most people know now. Meat and dairy are far more of a problem for the planet than plant-based foods. Runners are encouraged to have, you take on ample protein, or maybe more protein than non-runners. That can be an issue as well. So those were the three big areas that got me down in the dumps.
Now, we will revisit these three things, plus a fourth, when we talk about the purpose of the green runners and what you're trying to achieve with that. But another key element that was covered in this book is the impact of, and you've mentioned this, big, large-scale sporting events. And, they generate a lot of emissions, a lot of waste. There's also the question of questionable, alignment of questionable sponsors, which we'll touch on separately as well. But a good example we can start off with is UTMB. When we chatted last year about it, was pretty fresh. I'd just come back from UTMB and it was all kind of fresh, but it gained quite a bit of traction. There's been quite a lot of conversations, some positive and so on. But talk to us about the impacts of those large, and let's maybe talk about UTMB in particular, alignment with sponsorships, because I know there's others as well. Cycling, other marathons, Boston Marathon more recently, and so on. So,
well, thank you for bringing that up, because I hadn't really considered this when I was doing the book. I hadn't really considered this. I did interview the sustainability lead for the London Marathon, and it was her actually that mentioned, sponsorship's not great either. And because trail running's really, fairly small thing here anyway, there often isn't a sponsor for a race, or it's usually, if there is, it's usually a sportswear brand, for better or worse. But I remember her mentioning sponsors, and I remember thinking, oh right, yeah. And then, but then after that, I started noticing it creeping in. I mean, massively in football. I guess we're talking high carbon sponsors. So there's a campaign now called the Game Changer Sponsorship Pledge. Nothing to do with me, and they're campaigning to get rid of high carbon sponsors from sport, and they define high carbon sponsors as airlines and airports, fossil fuels themselves, the banks that back fossil fuels, and the fifth one is car manufacturers. And that is the more borderline one. That is the trickier one. Most of us, don't own a bank or an airport, whereas most of us do own a car. So it's a bit more of a trickier one. But I guess I kept an eye out and start noticing, it's massive in football, it's in golf, it's in cycling. I've seen reports now, there are, I think it's over 300 cases now of what we call sports washing. So these industries, are doing bad to the planet, but they want to look like they're doing good. So they're getting into sport because it's healthy, it's adventurous, and often will readily take their money. And then in the middle of last summer, I noticed UTMB's Twitter handle changed its name to the Dacia UTMB, and I was like, oh, what's all this about? And the Game Changer pledge had only just launched, and I realized, yeah, that they had a new. Well, they did already have that sponsor, but they were just a smaller sponsor. But they became the headline sponsor of UTMB, and yeah, it was our duty, really, as the Green Runners had aligned with this Game Changer sponsorship pledge, to say, well, hold on, this is a high carbon industry. You're using sport to make yourself look adventurous and healthy and like you're doing good. So we started off a petition saying we didn't think, our sports, biggest, our flagship race, or any of our races really should have a high carbon sponsor. And yeah, I mean, it's a complex, fairly new debate. Not everyone agrees, but within a few, I think it was within 2 weeks, around 3,000 people had signed the petition. It had sort of media coverage in the US and France and other places. And that was really exciting. It led to direct discussions with UTMB. I mean, they've signed a contract. They're probably not going to just drop it just like that. But I think they got the message that we didn't like that. That's not okay, especially in that Chamonix Valley where the glaciers are so noticeably shrinking. And yeah, climbers struggle with some of the areas people used to climb at certain times of the year are no longer safe because the snow is melting quicker. So Chamonix, if anywhere in the world, was almost the perfect spot to say, hold on, someone in that valley is embracing high carbon sponsors, and yet that same valley you can see climate breakdown happening. And then you look around further, and it's at the moment it's mostly the big American marathons, but they often have high carbon sponsors, including the banks that back fossil fuels heavily. So we've ended up having one-on-one discussions with some of the sponsors actually, and some of the races, and we understand it's not straightforward, but yeah, we feel strongly that that's not okay, I suppose.
You've mentioned football, soccer in our part of the world, very involved. Fossil fuel companies, whether it's not fossil fuel like Ineos, it could be an airline, for instance, very, very common. Cycling is very big as well. But here's the thing, and it's a bit of a conundrum, because boycotting fossil fuel sponsors, and could be fast food as well, McDonald's, Coca-Cola. So we're talking about World Cups, we're talking about all these big events. It's not that clear cut because they're also enabling these activities to happen, aren't they? Because big events like trail running events, they cost a lot of money, especially the safety aspect. Actually, one of our listeners here is an ocean swimmer, 10K. So how many boats you got to have in the water for safety? So these are costs. There's also the development of youth, removing barriers to access for communities. So sometimes we kind of need these big sponsors, don't we? So it's a conundrum.
Well, I would say, it's definitely tricky. It's definitely complex. I would say something like UTMB, they used to have a sportswear sponsor, and we know they're not perfect, but that isn't a high carbon sponsor. And they seem to be doing just fine with the sportswear. And I have put this to them directly, and they didn't really have an answer. I think we know that their high carbon sponsor offered more money. So they were doing just fine with a sportswear sponsor. And I would say to some other brand, events, do you need to be, if only a high carbon sponsor can support you to that extent, do you need to be at that scale? Could there be, I guess just like UTMB, do they need to expand to that? Because that expanding isn't a sustainable way forward. And I would say, tobacco, the classic case is tobacco. Tobacco used to sponsor lots of sports. Gradually we've moved on, and this feels very similar. And the messages at the time were, you won't survive without the tobacco sponsorship, and those sports are doing just fine. And I would say, if ask yourself, are you okay if they're a tobacco sponsor? Are you okay if it's something even worse than that? Would you be okay with it? But I appreciate sometimes it takes time. Sometimes contracts are signed. But yeah, as far as I'm concerned, high carbon sponsors are not welcome in our sport.
So on that point, how important is it to support local events as opposed to global entities? So direct impact to local communities, usually the better value, you get a better experience. How important is that?
Yeah, I mean that's the sort of the flip of the coin, the other side of it, isn't it? And that's wonderful, and we're seeing that. I think we're seeing that in Britain. In fact, we've had a big announcement here just yesterday, where UTMB have purchased um, a popular race here. I don't know if the news has reached down there or whether it even would, but we only had one sort of UTMB race here, and it meant yeah, it was difficult for people to get their stones without going abroad. But they've just bought a new race, and it's very controversial. People are very upset actually
Do we mention
for a
Canada
variety
then?
of reasons. Oh, the Canada thing, yikes. Well, yeah, I don't know if I want to go into that one, but yeah, I mean UTMB. If we're getting on about UTMB, they seem to be making every mistake they possibly can to get
Yeah.
people offside. It's going to be really interesting. Yeah, there's a very popular 100-mile race here that happens in January, and UTMB have just sort of bought it. But yeah, the response seems to be, judging online, which is always a bit dubious, but 80-90% people against it, very sad about it. And that is partly because it felt like a local race that was a grassroots thing, and now it feels, I suppose, to some people that they've sold out. They've become part of a big global machine that people don't like, that doesn't look like it cares or understands. So yeah, I think that will send people hopefully to more local races nearby. But yeah, I mean, I've got to put my hands up. Yeah, no, you're probably going to ask me about Barkley. I mean, that's not a local that's not a local race to me. So I mean, I don't think we should put it in the position where everyone should only do their local races. I think you're allowed one or two dream races. But yeah, combination of supporting local things and one or two big dreamy goals as well.
But those dreamy goals can still be abroad in another country supporting a local community event as opposed to a global entity. Now, before we get on to Barkley, because it is on the talking points here, we are going to ask one or two cheeky little questions there. Bring a little bit of positivity back, because it does sound very gloomy. It does sound like, gosh, okay, I'm just going to run laps of my local, reserve, and that's it. I'm not going to be, I'm going to withdraw. I'm not going to support all these entities. But ultra running can still be quite progressive, and has been quite progressive, hasn't it? Because a lot of other sporting entities are looking at us collectively. We're doing a lot of good still in this space, and a lot of event organizers are doing some good and leading the way.
No, that was totally it. And towards the end of my book, I became more optimistic, because I realized that the sort of trail running to an extent was kind of leading actually, and certainly the road running scene, they look to trail running and go, well, how can we get by without all the water bottles or without all the cups? What do they do in trail running? Runners are more sort of self-sufficient in trail running, aren't they? What can we do? So and also a lot of the initiatives we have, well, I mean, your introduction to this webinar was a great example of all the things you're doing. There are some things up here similar, I suppose, like Free Loved Sports. We have, trying to keep the circularity of sportswear, keep it going, keep it being used. Trees Not Teas is founded by a friend of mine. And yeah, things like the Green Runners things. There's a few things happening in America. Eco athletes and I think it's Runners for Public Lands. So yeah, it actually felt relatively optimistic towards the end, where I realized, we are the runners who are more likely to be running in nature, I suppose, and there does seem to be a correlation. What's interesting is, in Britain anyway, there's a group here called the Champions for Earth, and they're almost all water sports people, and it does feel like the water sports people were ahead of us. They got it earlier, but it feels like perhaps in Britain anyway, we're kind of next, and then it does feel like maybe more urban based, like sort of triathlons and road running. They're a little bit behind, but I'm hoping they'll join us soon as well. But yeah, there is reason for optimism, and I guess, I mean, that UTMB thing, it's debatable whether we really changed anything or not, but it felt like a moment where there was some people power, to use that sort of cliche. We definitely got their attention. We definitely made our point. And that was partly because lots of people getting together, and even just a bit of collectivism, just putting your name on a petition, that had an impact. So that, I felt that was pretty encouraging.
So we mentioned Barkley. Let's quickly touch on that, because it'll lead into our next part of the conversation. I mentioned 2 DNFs last year when I introduced you, and I said 1 DNF. We said, you got to celebrate, because there's still a significant milestone. You're one of 2 people that had started the fourth lap, but hadn't quite completed, but was still a significant milestone. But second attempt, oh, so close. Just for the, I know everyone listening would love to hear something. So a very short synopsis. How did that go?
I mean, first of all, I always feel quite self-conscious about, obviously I did fly to get there. No other travel options seemed practical and realistic. But that's I've done 2 flights for running in 5 years, basically. So that's kind of my big dream race. I don't think people should sort of have to give up, all their dreams. But I've massively reduced my flying. I'm lucky I can, for races in Europe, such as Tour de Gilles, which I really enjoy. I can get trains and buses now. So I just always feel I need to explain that. And Jasmine Paris, who's a friend and who I co-founder of the Green Runners, and I coach her. She's the same. She's only flown to Barkley in the last 4 or 5 years. They're the only flights she's done for running. And some people are totally fine with that, and some people like to point fingers, and that's all right. But yeah, I feel very very lucky to be able to do it, because obviously it's only 40 people at the most, and I was on the waiting list for 2 years. And I guess you asked a brief synopsis, didn't you? Couldn't find the books quickly enough. So it's an incredible event. It is tough. What I find tough is the mental fatigue. You have to be focused all the time. I'm quite accustomed to trudging on in a very tired state for hours and hours. I'm quite accustomed to it. I've done the Spine race 4 times, Tour de Gilles twice. But at the Barkley, you have to stay alert. You have to know exactly where you are. And for doing that, after 50 hours of that, mentally, I find it hard to stay alert, really, if I'm honest. And the navigation, is maybe something I can improve on, because it just took me, too long on that 5th loop to find books, and I was out of time. I'm not used to being timed out, but I was timed out basically for a 2nd year in a row. But the saving grace for me was being able to see Jasmine Paris finish was just magical. On the level of just a friend, and then as a coach, but then also just how historically a moment in history in running, and it was huge over here. Like, it was the most viewed story on the BBC website for several days. Millions, I think it's over 6 million people viewed it and stuff. And I keep hearing anecdotes of people who weren't into running, mentioning the word Barkley, and so it's and then she's been able to talk about environmental issues and the Green Runners in a lot of her interviews, and she's probably done 60 interviews now. Like, it was 30 within the first few days all around the world. From her flight, which in theory is terrible for personal footprint, her sort of carbon shadow, her sphere of influence from that is actually vast. And so, yes, to me, it's totally worth it. So I would say to people, actually, we can almost get too conscious of our personal footprint, and that might restrain us from doing things that sort of can bring huge good. I mean, the classic example is, I suppose, a climate scientist, or maybe in the work you do as well, Ben. Like, if you're going to travel somewhere and help spread a message and galvanize people, then often it is going to be worth it. So I think that's a great example of the good that has come from some emissions, but I think that will have be hugely offset in a positive way.
Before I get into the Green Runners thing, because it was going to be my segue, but you've actually segued into another part of the conversation I want to have, and that is embracing imperfect climate advocacy, right? There's a big fear in the general community that, well, if I can't do things perfectly or the way I should be, I'm not going to do it because I'll just be criticized. So it's the fear of not doing things perfect that stops people from actually doing something. And you've just touched on that. And Jasmine is just, okay, it's extreme, go and ruin yourself for 60 hours to do a whole lot of good. But the point is that no one is perfect, right? And you call yourself, I love this. And I mention this to a lot of people, and I say, I wish I could use it, but he's copyrighted it in jest. But you call yourself a hypocrite, a climate hypocrite. So, and talk to us about actually the importance of that statement and what it actually means. Why you use that term for someone like yourself who does so much, and people like myself look to you. You still call yourself a climate hypocrite.
Well, yeah, it's partly in jest and partly to almost try and take the power out of the word, because it was actually the eco athletes in America, when I sort of joined them and had some good chats. They'd done some research on why didn't more sports people speak out about environmental concerns, and there were three reasons, but the main one was they didn't want to be called a hypocrite, because obviously sport is part of the problem. Anything's part of the problem pretty much. We all have a footprint of some sort, of some size. And we can reduce it mostly, yeah, sure. But at some stage, you will have done all you can, and there's sort of 4 or 5 bigger things to do. And then you'll still have a footprint. And I've done most of the things I could think of, all the significant things, and my footprint was still probably 6 or 7 tons of CO2e, a year, which is about half the UK average, but it's still a footprint. So I was like, well, I can't, perfection is elusive. I'm not going to get to zero at the moment anyway, with sort of the systems we live in. So therefore, what I should not speak out, and that's what big oil, that's what these groups want. They want us to battle amongst ourselves, feel and BP, it was BP or the PR firm advising BP that came up with the concept of a personal carbon footprint. And there's something in it. It's interesting, I think, and it can help in some ways. But I don't think we should get too obsessed with. It was there was some research out in a couple of weeks ago saying 80% of the world's CO2e comes from 57 companies. It's not from a load of individuals. It's almost all from these big companies, especially fossil fuels. So yeah, we and I appreciate that won't be enough for some people. It's in terms of it still produces anxiety, sort of speaking out about stuff. But I found, there was a little bit of toing and froing online at the beginning, but actually I don't see much of it anymore. Maybe I've just blocked people. But I like to think the debate has moved on, and we're not so simplistic about oh well, hold on, you drove your car the other day, so how can you care about the environment? Everyone I've met who cares about the right things, is reasonable, I suppose, does, reduces where they can, but probably knows, they may fly occasionally, or they may have to take a car journey sometimes, and that's just the world we live in. And we want better, but at the moment we're not there. And I think embracing that term, it helps me anyway. But I would say, for some people, the online world, for example, isn't, some people are more comfortable than others. And Dan Lawson, actually a good friend of mine and a co-founder of the Green Runners, said to me recently, like, if the online world isn't for you for discussing this, just discuss it with friends and family and or your local running club. It doesn't have to be an online thing, which isn't always the best place for these things. I hope that answers. I've got a bit waffly there, but I hope that answers what you
We can digress with a different sport and look at cricket. Pat Cummins voted as the BBC Green Sport Awards Athlete of the Year last year. I didn't actually know this, but he's a climate activist himself, and yet we all know cricket. They travel, they play a lot of games all over the place, but it's a similar concept, isn't it?
Well, funnily enough, the Green Runners were nominated for BBC
That's right.
Green Sport Awards. So I went along with Jasmine Paris, and he didn't. Thankfully, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Should you fly to a Green Sport Awards? Some people, I must admit, some people had. Pat hadn't, but he sort of had recorded a special video for everyone, and he was nominated. The BBC Green Sport Athlete of the Year. I think he was really good. I can't remember exactly his wording, but he gave a really good speech on that, and just sort of kind of batted it away and said, to me it's like, should he have to give up his whole sport, his whole career, just to speak out? And he is doing good things on the side, and I'm sure he's doing good things in cricket. So I think we acknowledge our sport, our lifestyles are part of the problem, but we're trying to improve that. If someone's going to argue against that, I think that's more their problem than ours.
But if he gave up the sport and wasn't, apologies to our listeners who don't know who Pat Cummins is, Australian cricket captain. If he gave up the sport and didn't have the accolades he had, why listen to him then? So that's why no one listens to me. But that's why I got you on as a guest. Green Runners, let's talk about that. Jasmine is a co-founder. You're a co-founder. You mentioned a couple of others. A running community, that's been established in the UK, but is global. Jasmine, especially, one of the key outcomes of her recent result at Barclays is really gave a lot of good marketing space for the Green Runners, and I think you guys hit a milestone with the amount of new sign-ups and members to the Green Runners post Barclays. Tell us what the Green Runners is all about.
If you don't mind, let me backtrack just slightly there. One other point I wanted to make there actually is that I've seen some research. Again, the Eco Athletes, the American group, showed me this research that said sports people are the most influential people of our time, which is both sort of terrifying and I suppose galvanizing or reassuring. So it's not politicians, shock horror, but it's not pop stars or actors either. It's sports people who have the most influence, apparently. So. Yeah, so for Pat to use his platform, I think it's brilliant, and not enough sports people are, to be honest. And that probably comes back to that fear of being called a hypocrite. Some
athletes past that. And UTMB was an example with this, because let's backtrack even further back to an earlier part of the conversation. The whole rigmarole with UTMB, it wasn't just a letter. It wasn't just you sitting in your man cave, write a letter, I've done my bit. You actually took real action and you boycotted the race. And there were a couple of other pro athletes, but some find themselves in a bit of precarious position. So it's not always easy for a professional athlete to speak out because of sponsors, because of obligations.
That is true. And a really good athlete I was chatting to this week, actually, he was trying to debate whether to do UTMB or not, like which will give, if he I mean, that's exactly his dilemma. Should he do UTMB? He's sort of against what they're doing, but is it, what will have more impact, I suppose, doing it and saying stuff about it or boycotting it? And I should mention, Kylian Jornet is a member of the Green Runners, and he joined our petition and spoke about it on social media and said he was against and that was, that was powerful. That was really useful. That got headlines. And I must admit, he gets stick like some of us do, but I think he's a great leader in our sport. He does a lot with the Kylian Jornet Foundation, and people should look up also the Athlete Climate Academy, which has lots of interviews with scientists and so on. He's a great leader in our sport. So but it is a bit easier for someone of his, what's the word, kind of, he's in a really strong position in our sport. So it's easier, in some ways it's easier for him to speak up. So I do admire that. But yeah, it is tricky. It is tricky for sports people, certainly. But as for the Green Runners, it was about almost exactly 2 years ago we launched. There were a group of us, basically a WhatsApp group. I collected people who were runners, trail runners mostly, I suppose, who seemed to care about stuff, whether they'd said something on social media or whatever. But we didn't really know what to do. And it was my friend AJ, actually, he said, why don't we just form a club, form a running club? And it was like, oh yeah. And so we sort of did it, just having no idea where that would go, really. And nearly 2 years later, we got well over 1,000 members all around the world now as well. And it's not necessarily a geographical thing. Anyone can join. I like to think we're having, various discussions with various groups. I'd like to think we're doing some good and some things are happening. I mean, sometimes things don't always happen as quickly as you'd like, but I hope we're getting somewhere. And thank you for promoting us.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about it, because it's not just a WhatsApp group. It is about taking action, and you have effectively got 4 key pillars centered around that. We've touched on 3 of those, but we can go a little bit more, because let's now move into the part of, because I am conscious of time, what we can actually, when we end this session, what can we go away and do? So talk to us to the 4 pillars. Let's start with the first one, travel. You've already mentioned it. I think this was in your book. You mentioned generally well over 90% of the total CO2 equivalent emissions for an event. There's the travel aspect. So you mentioned a few things that you already do, but what can we be doing to reduce the biggest contributor to the carbon emissions in terms of accessing nature, in terms of getting to events or choosing events even?
Yeah, well, yeah. So yeah, there are four pillars. For the Green Runners has four pillars, and for anyone to join, they just pay a small fee to get your badge, and then it's up to you to just pledge to improve on at least one of those four pillars. It might even just be one, and yeah, the first one is travel, and I've come up with chatting to people in sustainability and events and so on. I've come up with a little checklist, which is kind of like, how important is the event? It could be anything in life, not necessarily running. How important is the event really? Do you need to be there? And then if you do, what's the lowest carbon way you can practically travel there? And then the third one is, if you are going to travel there, I guess make the most out of the trip. Can you visit a friend? Can you do some work? If it's a race, is there some work you could do around it? Can you stay for longer, which is genuinely seen as a useful thing to do. So those are the three things I think of really now. So, but then it's totally up to people, where they are. We try and meet people where they are. If someone has to fly, I don't know, 5 or 10 times a year for work, we're not saying, right, you can't fly. It's up to people to make their own pledge on what's realistic to them. And then the other two are how you kit up. So I guess we're encouraging people to buy less kit and make it last longer. But, again, within reason, we're not slamming down any rules on people. And then how you fuel, in less meat and less dairy will be better. We call it almost a sort of planet-based diet. And fourthly, I think the most important one is how you speak up. So I guess we're encouraging people to talk about it, whether it's with friends or social media, or joining collective action, I guess is what we're alluding to as well. Like joining groups, your groups, joining Green Runners, Runners for Public Lands in America, groups like that. So that's really the premise of what we're trying to do.
So speaking of speaking up, excuse the pun, there's this huge, I've mentioned earlier that sports is a unique platform, and you mentioned for eco athletes that the research shows that athletes are people that are trusted and people listen to and look up to and are influenced by them, sometimes quite wrongly, but a lot of times quite positively as well. So for all of us here attending this session, a key takeaway here: how vital is it as athletes, as ourselves as athletes, in taking action? Like how how powerful is our voice? We're not professional athletes, but even just as day to day, I mean, how much influence do we actually have?
That's a great question. I tell you a couple of things. Is what I realized is I think we shouldn't underestimate how influential we can be. I realize now that there are a couple of good friends of mine who really influenced me early on, but at the time I sort of dismissed, it was a good friend of mine, actually, Ryan. Ryan lives in Perth, Canadian. And he was probably my first good friend that was very concerned about the environment. And I used to tease him, if I'm honest. I used to sort of, we had great conversations, and I was impressed that he was so serious about things, but I would tease him a bit. And it took a couple of years before I was like, no, hold on, I care about those things too. I mean, this is, a while ago when things seemed less urgent, but he knew, he was ahead of the curve. He knew. And then I remember another friend as well. I do mention this in my book. This is my friend Matt, who lives in Santiago, Chile now, actually. But he, at the end of his email signature, I think he put environmentalist. And I remember thinking, what is that? Maybe think it was a bit lofty, or But now I realize those two people, they influenced me. There was a trickle down thing where, and then you think, how many people has he emailed, over that period of time? So, I became like those two friends of mine. Thank you, Ryan and Matt. It took a while, but their small influence, or comparatively small, but then you could say that's gone on and on. It's partly led to sort of the Green Runners and so on. It's partly led to that book. So and that's without any sort of platform. That's just two friends of mine. So if you think of it like that, and that did take a little while, but then I'm slow to get around to things. Yeah, I mean, hopefully that's just a good example of how things can sort of snowball. So yeah, don't underestimate your influence. I think a lot of the time, that those sort of things are happening all around us. So yeah, chat to friends, chat to family, chat in your running club. I think, yeah, we're kind of at a tipping point. I think most people are realizing this stuff is urgent. Most people do care, and most people probably, well, we're seeing studies that say people care, but they don't necessarily know what to do. And I think that is the first thing to do, actually, is to talk to other people. And that does come actually from Professor Catherine Hayhoe, I think a US-based Canadian climate scientist, who says that's the number one thing to do. You talk to people, and that's your speaking out pillar.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more. It's the little things. If each person does something small collectively, it amounts to a lot. I say that a lot myself. Diets is another one that creates conversation. If you turn up to work with this weird vegan food, but it always looks colorful and always looks good, creates conversation, and before you know it, someone comes up to you then after and says, you know what, I did a vegetarian dish for the family last night, and that sort of starts being a catalyst for change. So people do see what you do. They do see what you wear. They do see your actions. They might not say anything. And social media, you put up a photo and on a nice run, a beautiful day, people see it and they get inspired to get out in nature as well. So couldn't agree more. I think we don't need a pro athlete. Someone's got a massive platform, can be a catalyst for much bigger change, but as a collective, we can also achieve the same thing. So Damian, hugely inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing so many little nuggets of really, I was going to say useful, but inspiring information. And really, I hope that's a catalyst for a lot of people here to leave this conversation and take another step forward without the fear of being imperfect, but just to try and do something a little bit different that's not going to just benefit themselves, but the community and our planet. So thank you so much for your time, Damian. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Ben. Thanks for putting on these webinars, and yeah, thanks for the incredible work you're doing. You're doing down there and everywhere. And thanks to everyone. Thanks to everyone for tuning in and for all the things you're doing too.
So we've got I've been kind of keeping an eye on the chat. What we can also do is if someone wants to ask a live question, we can do a couple and just stick your hand up. But just going through the chat, there is a little common thread I have been looking at. It's around the shoes, because I think you've put references to that in your book as well. That there is no science that says you have to throw your shoes away after a certain amount of kilometers. Killian with his brand Normal is also kind of busting that, saying you can run more mileage than your typical 500k, 600k, or whatever it is. But people want a little bit more than just being told that. Is there some the whole correlation of you're injured because of your shoes? You're a coach, you look at run form. Is it necessarily the shoes, or could be other factors actually that we should be looking at as well?
Yeah, no, it is a complex one. And I must admit, I've got a friend who's a fellow sponsored athlete by the same brand as me. And I say my shoes easily last 1,000 miles, but he says he's wearing the same shoes. He's a very good runner. He's a running coach. And he says that they're done after maybe 500 or 600 miles. So what that can tell us, that's not a scientific study, but what that can tell us is the terrain you run on, body composition, your technique, those are factors, those are important things. So it's not, if someone can make shoes last a certain amount of time, it doesn't mean everyone will. But certainly then, back to Dan Lawson, who's a GB ultra runner, he's making his shoes last, I don't know, closer to 2,000 miles than 1,000 miles. But again, it could be the technique, the way he runs, and so on. So yeah, I did look at, I looked through several studies trying to find one that directly connected, running shoes to injury, and it's unproven at the moment. I mean, I must say, I'm sure you could, if you really wore a shoe for forever, I'm sure you could at some point. That might be a factor. If hammering the downhills in a tiny bit of cardboard, that might lead to issues. But I'm just finding of course, some of these companies want you to move on and buy another pair pretty soon. When, for me, mine are lasting well. And there are some, cleaning them will help, especially in Britain. I don't know if it's the same down there, but in certain bogs, we have there's a bacteria that actually kind of eats the shoe. So cleaning your shoe can be a significant, make a significant difference. Trying not to sort of force your foot in, the back of the shoe where it all gets bent and stuff, that the shoe loses its integrity. So, and then you can, mine nearly always develop a hole, basically where the shoe bends the most by the little toe joint. But a friend of mine has launched a little company called Pair Ups, and you buy these little patches that you stick on, and that, if you put it on quickly, that hole kind of doesn't sort of quickly become a big hole. So there's at least 3 things you can do to sort of keep a shoe lasting longer. But I guess that's it really. So some people, they won't last that long. And I would, if you're starting to, one trick, of course, is to almost relegate a shoe to, once you know it's done a lot of miles, you relegate it to just kind of the 1 hour easy run. Don't take it on your 3 hour, 4 hour run. Save it for just your little short recovery runs. And then after that, the idea is kind of you use it for, the dog walks or the gardening. Just to try and make the shoes last. But ultimately, a shoe it's the same as kind of a long distance journey. I'm trying to think of this. It's about the same as like in England driving from sort of London to Glasgow. So ultimately, it's if you're really concerned about making your shoes last, but I suppose you're flying abroad to 3 races a year, then I'm just trying to put it in that context. But shoes is it's an interesting,
it's a tricky one. Yeah. I mean, it also comes down to selecting the right brand. I mean, the Adi Zero Adios that's made for one wear versus a pair of shoes that's got a Vibram sole that's going to last better. But let's just expand quickly. Clothing is the same thing, right? Choosing the right brand. Because some brands, we're not talking about fast fashion here, we're talking about outdoor, but there are differences as well in terms of selecting the right company with the right kind of support as well to give longevity.
That's a great question. I get asked that a little bit, and actually I asked a sort of a sportswear sustainability expert this same question in the book. I kind of said which brands, which of the sustainable brands I should be buying from, and she said actually you're thinking about it wrong. You should be thinking more about yourself, what's going to suit you, so that the item suits you best in terms of fit, in terms of what you're planning to do. And I suppose, does that brand have a reputation for maybe being durable, fit that lasts? And then we'll get into the credentials in a second as well. But like, it's more about, how do you really need that item? Is it going to last? Does it really suit you? I suppose even is that a color you like? Because if you buy something and then go, oh, actually I don't really like it, then that's the problem more than the brand. But in terms of the brand, things to look for. I mean, B Corp. That's part of the problem. There are so many different sort of sustainability certifications that it can get so confusing, because there's separate ones for cotton, there's separate ones for down. And someone asked, well, here's another dilemma if we get into sportswear, is like, what's the most sustainable material? Well, it's actually organic recycled wool. That's the most sustainable material. But quite a lot of us don't like wearing wool. And in fact, the expert I was interviewing was saying, wool makes me itchy. I don't like it. Now, personally, I do quite like merino wool tops actually for a certain time of the, a lot of the year. But really, there's no point in you buying, these wool tops if you're not going to wear them. So it's almost what's going to suit you and what you're going to like and wear the most.
Yeah, and there's some good outdoor brands there are some good outdoor brands that also offer sometimes free repairs as well. So selecting a brand that will back you, rather than, oh, sorry, that button fell off, here's a new top, we'll chuck that out the back because we know where that's going to go. So I think there's also that, but also being wary of the greenwashing, because there is also things that are very popular as everything's made from recycled plastic or ocean plastic, marine debris, but it's not all what it seems to be, is it?
No, that's a really good point, man. About repairs and selling secondhand versions and so on. I think you can be more trusting of a brand that does that. But yeah, one of the classic things is the well, let's name them. Yeah, I mean, Adidas were the ones selling shoes with plastic rescued from the ocean. But that's only one shoe out of, I don't know how many shoes they make, 40. And then of course they brought out this single use shoe at the same time. So it's like, well, does that company care? Well, to me, they clearly don't, because they've made one shoe to capitalize on people like us and market it to people like us, and then they've got another shoe that's doing entirely the opposite. So if a brand really, really cares, about their stuff, then they're wheeling that out across all their products, not just one product. But yeah, greenwashing is hard. It is hard to spot sometimes, especially if you're new. But I would look for things like repair schemes. I think that's a reasonable sign that company cares to some extent. I mean, these are still businesses, but yeah, I think that's a good sign. I think those are good points.
Yeah, Deborah, just to answer your question, more options. You need more options for donating. Start one yourself if you feel up to it. But there's a lot of other community groups as well that do collect secondhand apparel, shoes, and so on, and donate to those in need. Look, we got time for one or two more questions before we do need to let Damian get on with his day. We've got our nights. We got to get to bed, and so we can train in the mornings. But is there anyone who wants to ask a question, a live question? Just stick your hand up, and I can unmute you. But is there anyone that's got any questions they'd like to ask? So Freya's just put a question in the chat. Freya, do you want to ask that live?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi. Thank you so much, Damian. It's been really interesting hearing this chat. I help run one of the running clubs in Glasgow, and I'm really keen to encourage us on a club level to be greener. I think lots of us individually are doing things, but it'd be great to have more of a sustainable pledge as a club. One of our big events in the summer is a race in Glasgow, and I'd love to make the race more sustainable. I've been learning more about plogging, where you sort of litter pick and jog at the same time. So I think that's something I'm going to try and encourage, because we have to go and do a recce anyway to make sure the course is safe. So we might as well make it greener as we can. But yeah, we'd love to hear any other ideas of how kind of running clubs could be greener, as well as individual actions.
Well, yeah, no, that's brilliant, and thanks for your work. The number one thing which I think gets overlooked or sometimes it is the travel of how did people get there, and I don't think we should demonize people for whatever transport they've selected. But what most events can do better is to incentivize, I suppose, better travel options. So it might be a slightly reduced fee if someone came on public transport, or actually car sharing and carpooling. 4 people in a car is about the same emissions as a train or a bus. So actually, teaming up in a running club, going with your mates to the race or the event, is actually, well worth supporting. So could they have a reduced fee, or be entered into a raffle for a free race entry for next year, or just incentivize? And ultimately, financial incentives will probably have more effect for a lot of people. But can you incentivize carpooling or better transport options? I mean, I've been chatting to some friends who do a local race here, and there's just no public transport to that race. It's on a Sunday morning. There are no buses that go there. So that I'm chatting to them about how do they. So for them, the obvious thing is that the carpooling, the car sharing. How can they encourage that? And I think it's reduced prices or little other incentives, other rewards. I guess hopefully not sort of free t-shirts necessarily, but I think that is the big one really. And then but also almost spreading that awareness and that message is almost probably more important than reducing 3 car loads. Just spreading the message that's the important thing that we could be doing. That's the one I'd prioritize.
Yeah, I mean, we do that with our group training. When we've got our big group runs, I always put a note right at the bottom in our efforts to reduce our footprint: carpool, use public transport, bike there, etc. So, I think Damian's point is bang on. Is transport's an easy one. There's one event company here that tried to do it, and relatively successful actually with a series of trail runs around Auckland. like a park and ride. You park at a certain place and then you jump in another car, and that's what takes you into the forest for that event as well. So there's a lot of little initiatives like that where they try and make an effort. Cups, there's no excuse. It's 2024. There's no excuse to have cups in my mind. I mean, you're behind the times if we're still doing disposable utensils. So yeah. Right, Damian, again, thank you so much. We are truly inspired by all the amazing work you do. We're inspired by the huge challenges that you undertake. These events are just mind-boggling just to think about it. You go out there, you challenge yourself, you challenge the rest of us on how to do it better. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate your time and coming onto this webinar. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben, and thank you everyone for all your amazing work and for staying listening to me for this long. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Damian.